remember the first time I realized something was terribly wrong. It wasn't a loud argument or a dramatic confrontation. It was a quiet, almost invisible moment that etched itself into my heart like a knife. I had spent my entire life pouring love, time, and energy into my children. From sleepless nights to early mornings, from scraped knees to broken hearts, I had been there. Every achievement they celebrated, every tear they shed, I was there. I thought my presence was their foundation, their constant in a world that could feel cruel and uncertain. But one day, that foundation began to crumble, and I didn't even see the first cracks forming. It started with small things. Missed phone calls, forgotten birthdays, skipped dinners. I tried to tell myself they were busy, distracted by school or friends. I told myself that the love between parent and child was unshakable, that the bond we shared was immune to neglect. But the signs grew harder to ignore. Invitations to events never came, messages were left unanswered, milestones passed without so much as a thought for me. I asked questions, but their smiles were polite, their reassurances hollow. It was as if I had become a ghost in my own home, a presence unnoticed, unneeded. Then came the moment that shattered any illusions I had left. It was my 50th birthday, a milestone I had anticipated quietly, hoping for a sign that I mattered, hoping that my children remembered, that they cared. I had imagined their laughter, their hugs, the warmth of their love. Instead, the house was empty, the phone didn't ring. Not even a simple text, not even a fleeting thought. I waited, hoping they were just running late, hoping that something would come. But the hours passed, and as night fell, the truth became undeniable. They had purposely forgotten me. For 20 years, they had let me fade into the background, and this deliberate neglect was the cruelest betrayal of all. I sat alone that night, staring at the fading light through the window, feeling the weight of every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every tear shed for them crash down on me. The betrayal wasn't just in forgetting me. It was in the deliberate choice to erase me from their lives, to pretend I had never existed. I had given them everything, and yet, in their eyes, I was nothing. The pain was like fire running through my veins, an ache so deep it made me shiver uncontrollably. Love had transformed into absence, devotion into neglect, and the people I had cherished most had become strangers with cruel indifference in their hearts. That night, I realized something else, something I hadn't admitted to myself before. I would not beg for their love. I would not plead to be remembered. I would not allow their cruelty to define the rest of my life. But I would also not forgive. Not yet. Something inside me shifted that night. A quiet, determined flame that whispered of justice, of reclamation, of a revenge so subtle that it would leave them realizing, too late, what they had lost. I had been invisible for 20 years, but I was not gone, not truly. And if they had forgotten me, they would soon learn that some wounds, once ignored, grow strong, patient, and relentless. The days after that fateful birthday were the longest of my life. Each morning I woke up with a dull ache in my chest, a quiet reminder that my children had chosen to forget me. Their absence was a shadow that followed me relentlessly, whispering that everything I had done, the love, the sacrifices, the endless hours of care, had been meaningless to them. I tried to reason with myself, to believe it was a phase, a mistake, a lapse in their youthful judgment. But deep down, I knew the truth. This was deliberate. I had been erased, not by accident, but by choice. For weeks, I walked through life like a ghost in my own memories, going through the motions of work and routine, while my heart burned with a slow, unyielding fire. Friends offered pity, but pity felt hollow, almost insulting. They could never understand the particular kind of betrayal a parent feels when their children choose indifference over love, neglect over connection. I began to question everything: my identity, my worth, my purpose. But with that questioning came clarity. If they could dismiss me so easily, then perhaps the life I had built around them was not mine to cling to. Perhaps the only justice I could find was to reclaim myself, to step out of their world and build one that acknowledged my value, my dignity, my existence. And so the idea took root. At first, it was just a whisper in the back of my mind, leave. But as days passed, the whisper grew into a plan, precise and deliberate. I would disappear, not in desperation, not in shame, but in quiet, calculated triumph. I would take the pain they had inflicted and transform it into something powerful. I began researching, preparing, thinking of every detail, a new name, a new city, a life unrecognizable to them. I would erase every trace of my old self, every connection, every memory that tied me to the children who had forsaken me. The hardest part was not the logistics, it was the finality. I had to say goodbye to the life I had loved, to the roles I had cherished. The house, filled with echoes of laughter and the ghosts of birthdays past, would become a stranger's dwelling. My old phone, my social media, my friends who had watched me struggle, they would all fade into the past. And yet, within that finality, there was liberation. For the first time in decades, I realized that I had a life waiting for me, one not dictated by others' indifference. I could build something beautiful, something wholly mine. The night I left, I stood at the doorway of the home I had poured my life into, feeling the weight of 20 years of neglect and love collide in my chest. My children were asleep, or perhaps somewhere else, too preoccupied to think of me. I whispered a silent goodbye, not filled with anger, but with a bittersweet tenderness. They would never know the moment of departure, would never witness the birth of my transformation. And as I drove away, the city lights behind me fading into darkness, I felt the first real flicker of freedom in years. I was no longer a forgotten parent. I was no longer trapped in the shadow of betrayal. I was becoming someone new, someone unrecognizable, unstoppable, and entirely unbound by the pain of the past. And in that quiet, unwavering resolve, the first seed of my silent, sweet revenge began to bloom. The first months were the hardest. Every corner of my old life haunted me. The creak of familiar floorboards, the scent of home, cooked meals, the echoes of laughter that no longer included me. Yet, with every mile I put between myself and the life that had betrayed me, I felt something stir within me, a quiet, resolute strength I hadn't known I possessed. My new identity became more than a mask. It became a shield, a declaration that I would no longer be defined by the neglect of those who had forgotten me. I settled in a small, bustling city far from my past. The anonymity was exhilarating. I chose a new name, one that felt like it had always belonged to me. Each day, I molded myself into someone entirely unrecognizable to the people who had once taken my devotion for granted. I enrolled in courses I had long dreamed of taking. I threw myself into work that challenged and fulfilled me, and I began forming friendships that were reciprocal, genuine, and nurturing. For the first time in decades, I felt seen not as a parent, not as someone who exists for others, but as a person of value, ambition, and dignity. As my life flourished, I found myself learning of my children's lives through subtle channels, social media posts, mutual acquaintances, occasional glimpses from afar. At first, I approached these fragments with curiosity, almost detached, but soon I noticed patterns, struggles, disappointments, moments of regret. They seemed to be living lives smaller than the ones they could have shared with me, facing challenges that might have been lighter with my guidance, lighter with my presence. I didn't gloat, at least not openly, but there was a quiet satisfaction in knowing that I had chosen a life of substance and meaning while they had chosen indifference. The irony was almost poetic. I had left as the heartbroken parent, the one discarded and forgotten. Yet now I was thriving, respected in my career, admired in my community, and entirely independent. I built a home filled with warmth, laughter, and love. But this time it was mine, curated by my own hands and sustained by my own heart. There were no ghosts here, no reminders of betrayal, only the steady pulse of life rebuilt and reclaimed. Occasionally, I allowed myself to imagine the faces of my children if they knew. Would they recognize the strength I had cultivated? Would they see the joy I had carved from pain? The thought was not driven by cruelty, but by a quiet sense of poetic justice. For 20 years, they had acted as if I didn't exist. And yet, here I was, a life fully lived, radiant and whole, without their acknowledgement, without their apology, without their permission. The greatest revenge, I realized, wasn't confrontation or anger. It was living fully, unapologetically, and beautifully. It was the life I had denied myself for decades being reclaimed and amplified, a testament to resilience and quiet triumph. Each day was a reminder that while they had forgotten me, I had not forgotten myself. In their absence, I had discovered something far more valuable, the truth that love given to oneself is the most enduring, unshakable love of all. And as I looked out over the city from my new apartment, lights twinkling like a constellation of possibilities, I understood something profound. I was no longer defined by betrayal or neglect. I had become my own legacy, a silent, sweet reminder to those who had forgotten me that some losses are irreversible, and some victories require only courage, patience, and the quiet, unwavering belief in oneself. Years passed, and I became someone unrecognizable to my children, not just in name, but in every essence of life. The person who had once waited, heart aching, for a simple acknowledgement had transformed into someone strong, confident, and wholly independent. I watched from a distance, quietly observing the fragments of their lives, the choices they made, the paths they stumbled along. There was no malice in my gaze, only a subtle, serene satisfaction. Life had a way of balancing itself, and I had chosen to let it do so silently, elegantly, without lowering myself to confrontation. I often wondered if they ever thought of me, not just as the parent who had provided meals and comfort, but as a person, as someone whose presence mattered. Sometimes I caught glimpses of their struggles online or heard about them through mutual acquaintances. There were small failures, heartbreaks, and moments of doubt that mirrored what I had once endured. And in those glimpses, I felt a quiet triumph. They had not been mindful of me when I could have helped, and now they were learning lessons in absence, in ways that were subtle, unavoidable, and almost poetic. Yet it was not revenge in its bitter, vengeful form. Revenge would have been cruel confrontation, demanding acknowledgement, forcing guilt. No, my revenge was silent, invisible to their eyes, but undeniable in its consequences. It was the flourishing of a life built without them, a life that shone precisely because I had taken the pain they inflicted and transformed it into fuel for growth, resilience, and joy. Every friendship, every success, every quiet moment of peace was a testament to the fact that I had reclaimed my existence, that their neglect could no longer define me. There were nights, however, when I allowed myself to feel the pangs of sorrow. Memories of small hands in mine, of bedtime stories and whispered secrets, still visited me. I felt the weight of what had been lost, the intimacy that would never return. But alongside that sorrow was a stronger, steadier emotion. Pride. Pride in the person I had become, in the life I had built, in the strength I had discovered in absence. And slowly, I realized that pride was far sweeter than any confrontation could ever be. One evening, standing on the balcony of my new home, I watched the city lights stretch into infinity, each one a small universe of possibility. I thought of my children and felt neither anger nor desire for restitution, only clarity. They had forgotten me, but I had never forgotten myself. I had left not out of weakness, but out of wisdom, understanding that some connections are too toxic, too destructive to remain tethered to. By walking away, I had protected my heart, my dignity, and ultimately my happiness. And in that quiet understanding, I found the ultimate satisfaction. My revenge was not loud or public. It was woven into every choice I had made, every moment of self-respect, every triumph I had built on the ruins of neglect. They would never call me back, never apologize, never acknowledge the life they had taken for granted. And yet I was free, whole, and unbroken. Their forgetting had not destroyed me. It had propelled me into a life more vivid, more joyful, and more complete than they could have imagined. I smiled then, softly, without bitterness, and whispered into the night, "I may have been forgotten, but I am not gone, and in the end, I am unstoppable."